So, Pot Humor is the new comedy special. Did you know that you were going to be making a special and you wound up with Comedy Dynamics? Or is it that Comedy Dynamics approached you about doing a special?
No, I've been prepping this special for years in that I've been hosting a show every April 20th at the UCB Theater and doing a similar version of that show at music festivals and comedy festivals for a few years. So I've kind of been formulating it in my mind. And with the recent large changes in the whole culture in the last couple of years, I felt like now's the time to put it all together. And then I did a trial run of it in Colorado a summer ago, in Denver and Fort Collins and Colorado Springs and Boulder. And in Colorado Springs, there was a vape lounge, which was similar to the one I used in the special, where people can get high and watch the show at the same time, which is kind of a rarity. So I definitely had it in my mind and a vision for it. And once I had the demo made, I pitched it to Comedy Dynamics, which makes a lot of the stand-up specials these days.
And did you tape it all in one show, or is the show itself a combination of two or three shows like usually is the norm these days for comedy specials?
Yeah, I think everyone that does a special these days shoots two in a night, and that's what we did. But I really played with that because another part of my vision was to make it really trippy in the editing. And a few times, like there's some mirrors were kind of just already organically on the wall at this cannabis club, and posters and stuff. And certain points in the special, we cut out the mirror, or rather insert a box, as they say in editing, into where the mirror is or when the poster's on the wall. And one time we do that in the extreme of like showing a different version of what's happening in stage in one. I'm sorry, let me explain this. While most of the show is the second show we taped, every once in a while I'll put something from the first show up on the poster on the wall or in the mirror. And an extreme version of that is right after I take the bong hit, which is about halfway through the show. I have the bit I do right after that. I have both the 7 o'clock show and the 9:30 show going simultaneously. So I'm doing the same bit, and we're syncing it up as much as possible. But even when we sync it up, I always do it slightly different. So what you see up hear up in the mirrors is a little different than what's on the stage. And I pitch one of them up and pitch one of them down, the sound, so you can separate it a little bit. So it was that kind of experimentation that we actually used a lot of the meat from the buffalo, all parts of the buffalo from both shows, more so than I think you would in most specials.
Having finished a special and getting it out into the world, are you the kind of performer and artist that immediately starts thinking of the next special, or are you just good for a while?
Something happened when I was just at Just for Laughs doing a version of this special in Montreal, and also doing a taping on one of their stand-up comedy television shows. And that's not a norm for me. I don't usually do the 7-minute sets on comedy shows. I don't really ever tailor my material, but to do that or even think about that. But they make you do it when you go do the festival, and it was a challenge. And when I was doing it, the first time I did the warm-up set, I did not feel comfortable about it at all because I felt really stiff. And I felt like I'm so not used to packing my material into a perfect 7 minutes. And because TV does not give you room to breathe. And that's what I'm all about. I'm an improviser and I like to ad lib and play around with the audience and that kind of stuff. And when you're told it has to be 4 minutes, it has to be 5 minutes exactly. So that becomes all about exact punchlines. And that made me very stiff when I did my warm up set and I hated it. So when I actually did the TV taping, I decided, screw it. I'm just gonna go Robin Williams this thing. I'm just gonna go out and play with the stage, and I just whatever's on the stage, and the audience can see, and the TV audience can see. I'm just gonna play with that, and I did it, and it went over well, and I was like, I would like to try doing this for a whole show. So the long way of answering your question, that's my next goal, is to try to do a more kind of Jonathan Winters, Robin Williams approach to doing a set and building from that rather than a fixed theme like I did on this one.
You mentioned being an improviser and all that, and of course you're a podcaster, and in general you're one of the co-founders of UCB. And to me at this point, UCB is on that Mount Rushmore of comedy with Second City and National Lampoon. Is that something that you're comfortable hearing?
Thank you. Yeah, I am comfortable with that. I mean, I think when it comes to comedy education, at the very least, we've really focused and put in a lot of hard work to being the best. So yeah, I'm at the very least proud of that aspect of what the UCB has become. And then the stuff that comes out on the theaters, yes, I believe it's great work, and it's as worthy as anything on Second City or any comedy theater. So yeah, I'm proud of both those parts of the UCB.
And anytime you have an organically grown thing that is able to have multiple locations, you undoubtedly have corporate people sniffing around saying, how can we grow this and how can we make this even bigger? Have you guys turned down a lot of interesting proposals over the years?
Yes. And, some of them, my dad was an investment banker, and he tells the story of turning down pantyhose. So, but like you get, and like we went through the whole internet boom and web series boom. There's been a lot of kind of booms where internet company would want to take us over or something and crank out web videos or that kind of thing. Or a big stand-up club company would want to make, 50 UCBs in the United States. And maybe we could see a dozen, but 50, I don't know. It didn't seem, some of the proposals, without getting too specific, just didn't seem to fit us, or they didn't seem to get us, whoever they happened to be at the time.
So looking at all that, I love the fact that UCB was basically created to make your own scene, the way that a lot of indie rock kind of happened because, well, the major labels didn't want them, and ultimately they grew something so organic that everyone wanted to be in business with them. Does that music analogy ever, ring true? Do you think about that, or did that even have influence to you guys going into business for yourselves?
I'm reading a book called American Hardcore right now, where they talk about all the early punk scene in America in like 1981, or really in the late 70s up to like 85. And it makes me reminisce about, because that's how those scenes started. Like, you just get a bunch of teenagers that are bored in LA and they hear about the Ramones in New York, or they hear about the Sex Pistols in England, and they mimic parts of it, and then they change other parts and make it their own. And I'm truly fascinated by how scenes like that start, even beyond how our own scene started. But when you say go into business, like we never never thought of it as going into business even today. But like a band wouldn't think about, let's get into the business of being a band. Just like, let's get being a band. And the business might come or it might not. If you're pure in your intent, I guess. So I wanted to do comedy, and then I wanted to be Kids in the Hall. And then, I wanted to be a character actor on sitcoms. Like I follow my comedy art dream, and every once in a while, some of those things become something that'll help me make a living too. Like I'm not going to make a living off this stand-up special as much as my work, network sitcom work. But I'm much more proud of my hour of pot humor than I would be of doing 4 lines on a network sitcom. Is that a long way of answering your question?
You definitely answered the question there about the music comparison, and sounds like Get in the Van is another book that'd be up your alley in general. It's good to know that, hardcore and punk rock and DIY ethic played into everything. Have you ever thought about, because you're obviously playing an alternative venue with this, but have you ever thought of doing, a rock venue tour or touring with bands as opposed to just doing comedy on that end?
I actually have. I haven't really toured per se, but I actually grew up with guys who were eventually in a band called Trusty that was on Discord Records. And I always wanted to be in that band or wanted to have that life. So I was always doing shows with them. And doing comedy and rock together is always an interesting mix, for better and for worse, and maybe for worse more than for better. I would say if they're coming to see the rock band, if your name is bigger than the rock band, then you're going to be okay. But if it's like if you're less than, then you're in trouble. It's much easier to be a rock band and not be known than be the comedian not known on the rock bill, if that makes sense. Because they're used to you can talk while a rock band's playing. You can't talk while a comedian. So if they're losing interest in me the way they lose interest in a band, my set is doomed. That being said, when I have done it, it has been with my friends, and I think we're of equal billing or whatever. So it's always been in like Arkansas, for the most part, or where I'm living at the time, like Chicago. So I do like that. Do I want to do a tour? Yeah, I guess if I was equal billing to the band, otherwise I'd be a little fearful. As far as venues, I've done that too. I've done so many different kinds of venues, but yeah, there's that thing of also standing versus sitting too. Like I've done some venues where there's no chairs and there's 40 people in the audience and they're standing rock and roll style in front of me, and I'm on a 5-foot, rock stage, and it's very awkward and weird. When they're standing there for, an hour, and I feel bad, I want to go, everybody just sit down, crisscross style, let's just relax. But yeah, but that being said, I do that. I do enjoy it, but it's not a perfect environment. I guess ultimately I prefer my audience to be seated, and a rock band prefers its audience to not be seated generally.
Makes sense to me. So 2 quick questions and then you're a free man. And the first is, since this is going up in the Jewish Journal, were you bar mitzvahed?
Yes, I was not. I actually, my first hour I ever did, my first stand-up special, it's audio, it's called Woo Pig Sue, and it's all about why I'm an atheist. And my father is or was Jewish, and my mother was a Presbyterian Christian. And they had a very the Christian side of my family. My grandparents were not happy about the mixed marriage, as they called it back then, at all, and it was very tumultuous for my mom and dad. The way my Christian grandparents treated the whole marriage in the early days of the marriage, and it really affected how I just viewed religion in general. And my Jewish grandparents who lived in Little Rock, who weren't, they were proud to be Jews, but they weren't religious. So they celebrated every holiday, but didn't care to explain to me what the holiday meant or why we were celebrating it. So I didn't get much religious training on the Jewish side growing up, and on the Christian side, they pushed it on me so hard that I rejected it. So I ended up just kind of growing up an atheist. But that being said, I just did a show in St. Louis, and that's where my ancestors come from. My Jewish ancestors, it started in the Ukraine, and then to Iowa, and then to St. Louis, and then a lot of the Besser family was back and forth between Little Rock and St. Louis. And after the show in St. Louis, and I told that lineage. I said that lineage at the start of the show, and then after the show, this woman comes up to me and she says, "Hey, I'm your cousin." And she looks like my cousins, and I wasn't aware of this branch of the family. And I'm like, "Oh my God, I'm meeting the St. Louis Bessers, which I didn't know exists." And then I find out she's just moved to St. Louis randomly. She's not the St. Louis Bessers, and she didn't even know the Bessers came from St. Louis, and she's from Mississippi. So then I went down her family branch, and it's right next to our branch. And I know I'm going down a long road here, but there's this in Little Rock, there's this Besser Hardware that I always knew growing up. There's Besser Hardware, and everybody knew Besser Hardware. It's a very old hardware store. And growing up, I would say, "Are they related to us?" And our family said no. There just happened to be Bessers, just the way not every Smith or Jones is related. That's just another Besser. They're not related to us. So now through this woman, I find out this branch does go to Besser Hardware, and they are related to us pretty closely. And now I'm like, why did my grandparents not let me know about that side of the family, or deny them, or why don't we talk about them or meet them or celebrating holidays? So it became this kind of mystery that I delved into the last few weeks. And now the more I read about it, I find out there was a whole Besser Hardware feud where two different Bessers were brothers, and they owned a hardware store together, and then they feuded, and then one Besser opened up a hardware store on the other side of the street, and there were two hardware stores competing, both owned by Bessers for a while, and then one beat the other one. And then through reading this, I find out that this branch were, big time businessmen, but meanwhile, my branch was not. They were very poor. My grandparents were poor. And now I'm finding out that they were what I'm figuring out, it seems, is the more successful Bessers were not proud of my poor grandparents, is what I'm starting to dig up. And it's very interesting. It's very interesting finding out about all this stuff, especially growing up with Besser Hardware being such a big thing in my town. People always saying, "Is Besser Hardware your family?" Me going, no, not at all. I was wrong. I know that was not the answer you thought you'd get to that simple yes/no question.
But it sounds like there's no relation to Spinal Tap drummer Joe Mama Besser, so that's a bummer.
No, yes there is. He is one of the St. Louis Bessers, and I've known that for a long time. He babysat my dad, Joe Besser.
Oh, that's a real thing?
Oh yeah, Joe Mama Besser from Spinal Tap is based on Joe Besser, the one of the Three Stooges. I thought you knew that. Yeah.
No, I didn't know
Joe
that.
Besser is one of the replacement Stooges of Curly and Shemp. There were two after that. One was named Joe, and one was named Curly Joe. And Joe Besser was one of the Three Stooges. He was also on Abbott and Costello. He was on the Joey Bishop show. So there's comedy blood already in the stream, I guess, my bloodstream.
Absolutely. Sounds like I have a lot of homework to do. So in closing, Matt, any last words for the kids?
For the kids. Don't smoke pot until you're in college. And for the grown-ups, please watch my special. It's on Apple and DirecTV and Amazon and all those places. You can go to mattbesser.com to find all those video links. And I do have a podcast called Improv for Humans, so I hope you can check it out there. And if you go by Besser Hardware, drop my name.
Thank you so much for your time, Matt.